The autumn sunlight filtered through the windows of Millbrook Elementary School's third-grade classroom, casting long shadows across the rows of small desks. Children's laughter echoed from the playground during recess, but 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez remained inside, hunched over her desk in the back corner, her small fingers gripping a purple crayon with unusual intensity. Mrs. Patterson, a veteran teacher of 23 years, had seen thousands of children's drawings. She decorated her classroom walls with colorful depictions of families, pets, and dream vacations. But as she walked past Emma's desk that crisp October morning, something made her stop cold. The drawing wasn't like Emma's usual work. Gone were the smiling suns and cheerful rainbows. Instead, dark scribbles filled the page, a stick-figure child with tears streaming down her face, trapped in what appeared to be a small, dark room. Looming above the child was a larger figure, drawn in harsh black strokes, with angry red eyes and hands reaching toward the smaller figure. "Emma, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson said softly, kneeling beside the desk. "Can you tell me about your picture?" Emma's hand froze mid-stroke. Her body went rigid, and for a long moment she said nothing. Mrs. Patterson had noticed changes in Emma over the past 2 months. The once cheerful girl who loved reading aloud had become withdrawn and silent. She wore long-sleeved shirts even on the warmest days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. "It's nothing," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. She tried to cover the drawing with her arm. Mrs. Patterson's heart clenched with a familiar dread, the kind that came from years of mandatory reporter training and the terrible suspicions that sometimes proved true. "Emma, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Anything at all." The little girl's brown eyes filled with tears. Her lower lip trembled. Around them, the classroom buzzed with the energy of children returning from recess, but Emma seemed trapped in her own silent world. He hurts me, teacher," Emma finally whispered, so quietly that Mrs. Patterson had to lean closer to hear. "The monster hurts me." "Who, sweetheart, who hurts you?" Emma's face crumpled. "Michael, my new daddy, but Mommy says I have to call him Daddy now." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Mrs. Patterson felt her stomach drop. Michael Brennan. She knew exactly who Emma meant. The man had been at the school just last week for the father-daughter breakfast, smiling broadly, playing the role of the devoted stepfather. He was Millbrook's golden boy, volunteer firefighter, little league coach, organizer of the annual charity drive. Just 3 weeks ago, the town council had named him Citizen of the Year. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Mrs. Patterson said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage and sorrow building in her chest. "You are very brave for telling me this. What you just said is very important, and I need to make sure you're safe. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Am I in trouble?" "No, baby. No, you're not in trouble at all. You did exactly the right thing by telling me." Mrs. Patterson's mind raced through her training. Pennsylvania law was clear. She was a mandated reporter. Any suspicion of child abuse required immediate action. But she also knew what came next would turn Emma's world, and this entire town, upside down. "I need to make some phone calls to people who help keep kids safe. Is that okay?" Emma's eyes widened with fear. "Will he know I told?" "I'm going to make sure you're protected, Emma. I promise." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson sat in Principal Hargrove's office, her hands shaking as she dialed the Child Protective Services hotline. Within an hour, the school was swarming with officials. A social worker with kind eyes and a gentle smile took Emma to a private room. Detective Sarah Chen from the Millbrook Police Department arrived shortly after, her expression grave. By the time school let out that day, Emma's world had irrevocably changed. Linda Rodriguez, Emma's mother, arrived at the school pale and shaking, torn between disbelief and dawning horror. "There must be some mistake," she kept repeating. "Michael would never. He loves Emma. He loves us." But as Detective Chen explained the process, showed her the drawing, recounted Emma's words. Something shifted in Linda's expression. Memories began clicking into place. Emma's sudden fear of bedtime, her reluctance to be alone with Michael, the way she flinched when he entered a room. "Oh God," Linda whispered, covering her mouth. "Oh my God, what have I done?" Meanwhile, across town at the firehouse, Michael Brennan was holding court with his fellow firefighters, laughing about weekend plans. He had no idea that at that very moment, Detective Chen was obtaining a warrant for his arrest. He didn't know that Emma's simple drawing and whispered confession had set in motion a chain of events that would expose him for what he truly was. By nightfall, the news had begun to spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Michael Brennan, the town's beloved hero, had been arrested on charges of child sexual abuse. The small community of 8,000 people erupted into shock, disbelief, and bitter division. In her small bedroom that night, Emma Rodriguez clutched her stuffed rabbit and stared at the ceiling. She had no idea that her whispered words to Mrs. Patterson would become the catalyst for one of the most controversial trials in Pennsylvania history. She didn't know that her tiny voice would eventually echo through courtrooms, inspire legislative change, and give courage to countless other silent victims. All she knew was that she had finally told the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the bravest thing a small voice can speak. The morning after Michael Brennan's arrest, Millbrook, Pennsylvania woke up to a nightmare it never saw coming. By 6 a.m., the story had hit the local news. By 8 a.m., it was trending on regional social media. By noon, the entire town of 8,000 residents had chosen sides in a battle that would tear their community apart. Detective Sarah Chen sat in her office at the Millbrook Police Department, reviewing Emma's case file for the 5th time. A 17-year veteran with specialized training in child abuse investigations, Chen had seen her share of difficult cases. But something about this one twisted her gut in a way few others had. The victim was so young, so small, so fragile. And the accused was so beloved, so trusted, so embedded in the fabric of this community. Her phone rang constantly. Reporters, town council members, concerned citizens, and most disturbingly, angry residents demanding to know why she was persecuting an innocent man. "Detective Chen, this is ridiculous," Council Member Tom Bradford barked through the phone line. "Michael Brennan is a pillar of this community. That little girl is obviously confused, or worse, being manipulated. You're destroying a good man's reputation over a child's fantasy." Chen kept her voice professional, though her jaw clenched. "Mr. Bradford, I can't discuss an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you that we don't arrest people based on fantasies. The evidence is compelling." "Evidence? What evidence?" The word of a 7-year-old who probably doesn't even understand what she's saying. Chen ended the call as politely as she could manage, but Bradford's words echoed the sentiment spreading through Millbrook like poison. The town's Facebook groups exploded with debate. "Stand with Michael Brennan" pages garnered hundreds of followers within hours. A GoFundMe for his legal defense raised $50,000 in 3 days. Meanwhile, Emma and Linda Rodriguez found themselves living in a different Millbrook entirely, one that had turned hostile overnight. Linda discovered the first message spray-painted across their garage door when she went to take out the trash. "Liar," in dripping red letters. Her hands shook as she called the police, but the responding officer's sympathetic expression told her what she already knew. In a town this divided, finding the culprit would be nearly impossible. At the grocery store, former friends crossed to the other side of the aisle. Women Linda had known for years whispered behind their hands and fell silent when she approached. At the checkout line, Martha Henderson, whose son played on Michael's Little League team, turned to face her directly. "How could you let your daughter destroy that man?" Martha hissed. "Michael Brennan saved my husband's life in that warehouse fire 3 years ago. He's a hero, and you're letting your child ruin him with lies." Linda's voice cracked. "My daughter isn't lying. Why would she lie about something like this?" For attention, because kids do that. Maybe you put the idea in her head during your divorce from her real father. Everyone knows you were bitter about that. The accusations cut deep because Linda had asked herself the same questions in those first horrible hours. Could Emma be mistaken? Could she have misunderstood something innocent? But then she remembered the nightmares, the regression in behavior, the fear in Emma's eyes. A mother knows. Deep in her bones, Linda knew her daughter was telling the truth. Assistant District Attorney James Morrison faced his own uphill battle. A prosecutor for 12 years, he'd handled difficult cases before, but none with this level of community backlash. His office had been flooded with calls demanding he drop the charges. The district attorney herself, Elizabeth Marsh, had called him into her office with concerns. "James, are you absolutely certain about this case?" DA Marsh asked, her expression grave. "Michael Brennan's attorney is Robert Hastings, one of the best defense lawyers in the state. He's already filing motions, already preparing to tear this case apart. And our entire prosecution rests on the testimony of a 7-year-old child who can barely speak above a whisper." Morrison spread the case file across her desk. "I've reviewed everything. The medical exam showed physical evidence consistent with abuse. Emma's disclosure to her teacher was spontaneous and unprompted. Her forensic interview was textbook. She provided specific details, demonstrated age-appropriate understanding, and showed classic trauma responses. This isn't a coaching situation or false memory. This is real." But will a jury believe it, with half the town ready to canonize Brennan? They'll believe it if Emma can tell her story. That's what we need to prepare for. But preparing Emma was proving to be its own challenge. Dr. Patricia Williams, a clinical psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, had been assigned to work with Emma. In their first session, Emma barely spoke. She drew pictures instead, always the same theme, small figures hiding from large, dark shadows. "Emma," Dr. Williams said gently, "I know you're scared, but telling the truth was the bravest thing you could do. Do you know what's going to happen next?" Emma shook her head, her small fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "There's going to be a trial. That's where people listen to what happened and decide what to do about it. You might have to tell your story to a judge and jury. Those are people whose job is to listen and be fair." "Will he be there?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "The monster." "Michael will be there, yes, but he won't be able to hurt you. There will be lots of people there to keep you safe." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to see him. I don't want to talk about it." Dr. Williams understood the impossible position this child was in. Emma was being asked to relive her worst trauma, to speak about unspeakable things, to face her abuser in a public forum, all while her community called her a liar. Meanwhile, Detective Chen's investigation uncovered troubling patterns. Michael Brennan had coached youth sports for 6 years. He'd volunteered at the community center's after-school program. He'd been a trusted figure with access to dozens of children. Chen began the delicate process of interviewing other families, looking for additional victims. What she found chilled her to the bone. 3 other mothers reported that their daughters had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around Coach Michael. One girl, now 12, broke down crying when Chen spoke to her, revealing that Brennan had touched her inappropriately 2 years earlier, but she'd been too afraid to tell. The girl's parents had dismissed her concerns at the time, chalking it up to a misunderstanding. "He's so good with kids," the mother sobbed to Chen. "Everyone said so, we thought. We thought she was being dramatic. Oh God, we didn't protect her." Chen added the information to her growing file, but the new revelations brought their own complications. The statute of limitations had expired on some incidents. Other families refused to come forward, terrified of the community backlash they'd witnessed the Rodriguez family enduring. By the end of the first week, the battle lines were firmly drawn. The Justice for Emma supporters held a candlelight vigil outside the courthouse, while Free Michael Brennan protesters marched on the other side of the street. their chants creating a cacophony of anger and pain. Inside her small bedroom, Emma Rodriguez heard the distant sounds of the protests. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter and wondered if telling the truth had been a mistake. The monster might be in jail, but somehow, the nightmare had only gotten worse. She didn't know yet that it would get worse still before it got better. She didn't know about the brutal cross-examination that awaited her, the public scrutiny, the pressure that would push her to her breaking point. But she also didn't know that her courage would ultimately change everything, not just for herself, but for countless other children trapped in their own silent nightmares. The battle for truth had only just begun. The threatening letters started arriving on the third day after Michael Brennan's arrest. The first one came in a plain white envelope with no return address, just Linda Rodriguez's name printed in block letters. Her hands trembled as she opened it at the kitchen table while Emma ate breakfast. Drop the CHARGES or else. Your daughter is RUINING, a good man's life. There will be CONSEQUENCES. Linda's blood ran cold. She quickly folded the letter and shoved it in her purse before Emma could see, but her daughter's perceptive eyes had already caught the fear on her mother's face. "What's wrong, Mommy?" "Nothing, baby, just some junk mail." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more letters arrived, each more menacing than the last. "We know where Emma goes to school. Accidents happen to little girls who lie. Leave town while you still can." Linda reported each one to Detective Chen, who documented them and promised increased patrols past their house. But the harassment extended beyond anonymous letters. Someone slashed all 4 tires on Linda's car in the grocery store parking lot. Their mailbox was knocked over 3 times. Eggs were thrown at their windows in the middle of the night. The psychological warfare was working. Linda barely slept, jumping at every sound. She'd taken leave from her job at the bank after her supervisor suggested it might be better for everyone if she stayed home during this difficult time. The unspoken message was clear. Her presence was bad for business in a town where half the customers supported Michael Brennan. Emma's situation at school had become unbearable. Despite Mrs. Patterson's best efforts to protect her, other children had overheard their parents' conversations. During recess, a group of 4th-grade boys surrounded Emma. "My dad says you're a liar," one taunted. "He says you're trying to send Coach Michael to jail because you're a bad kid." Emma ran to Mrs. Patterson, tears streaming down her face. The teacher held her close, fury building in her chest. She reported the incident to Principal Hargrove, but his response was tepid at best. "These are complicated circumstances, Patricia. Emotions are running high throughout the community. Perhaps Emma might be more comfortable with remote learning for a while." "You want to punish the victim by isolating her." Mrs. Patterson's voice rose. "She's 7 years old and she's being bullied for telling the truth about abuse." "I'm just trying to think of what's best for everyone. What's best for Emma is for this school to protect her." But the school couldn't protect Emma from everything. Her former best friend, Sophie Miller, stopped talking to her entirely. Sophie's mother had been one of Michael Brennan's most vocal defenders, organizing the Stand with Michael Facebook group that now had over 2,000 members. Emma spent lunch periods alone, drawing pictures in her notebook while other children whispered and pointed. She developed stomachaches every morning, begging her mother not to make her go to school. At night, she had vivid nightmares, not just about what Michael had done, but about standing in a courtroom while everyone yelled at her that she was lying. The preliminary hearing arrived like an approaching storm. It was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October, just 3 weeks after Emma's initial disclosure. The purpose was straightforward: to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. But for Emma and Linda, it felt like Judgment Day. Robert Hastings, Michael Brennan's defense attorney, was everything his reputation promised: silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and ruthlessly effective. He'd built his career on high-profile acquittals and had never lost a case involving allegations against prominent community members. His strategy was already clear: attack the credibility of a 7-year-old child. Outside the courthouse, protesters lined both sides of the walkway. "Justice for Emma," one side chanted. "Free Michael Brennan," the other shouted back. News cameras captured every moment as Linda, holding Emma's hand tightly, tried to navigate through the chaos. Emma's small body shook with terror. She'd never seen so many people, never heard such angry voices. A reporter shoved a microphone toward them, shouting, "Emma, how do you feel about the trial?" before a police officer pushed the journalist back. Inside, Emma waited in a private room while the hearing proceeded. Through the door, she could hear fragments of arguments. Hastings' voice, loud and confident, declaring that the case was a travesty of justice based on the unreliable testimony of a confused child who's been manipulated by adults. Ada James Morrison countered with the medical evidence, the forensic interview, the pattern of behavior. But Emma could hear the doubt creeping into the discussion. Judge Richard Thornton's questions were pointed. "Mr. Morrison, your entire case rests on the testimony of a 7-year-old. How do you intend to prove beyond a reasonable doubt?" Through a crack in the door, Emma glimpsed Michael Brennan for the first time since the arrest. He sat at the defense table in a perfectly tailored suit, looking calm and confident, occasionally shaking his head sadly as if he were the victim of a terrible misunderstanding. When his eyes swept toward the door where Emma watched, she swore he smiled, just a tiny upturn of his lips that made her blood freeze. She stumbled backward, crashing into a chair. Dr. Patricia Williams, who'd been sitting quietly beside her, immediately pulled Emma into her arms. "I saw him," Emma sobbed. "He looked at me, he knows I'm here." "Emma, listen to me, he can't hurt you. There are police everywhere." "I can't do this." Emma's voice rose to a near scream. "I want to stop. I want it all to stop. Tell them I lied. Tell them I made it up." Dr. Williams' heart broke. This was the breaking point she'd feared. The pressure had become too much for Emma's small shoulders to bear. The psychologist knelt down, grasping Emma's hands. "Emma, look at me. Look at me, sweetheart. I know you're scared. I know this feels impossible, but you didn't lie. What happened to you was real, and it was wrong, and it wasn't your fault. Everyone hates me. They think I'm bad. They think I'm lying." "Not everyone. Your mom believes you. Mrs. Patterson believes you. I believe you. Detective Chen believes you. And you know what? The truth doesn't change just because some people don't want to hear it." But Emma had reached her limit. When the hearing concluded, with Judge Thornton ruling that there was indeed sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, Emma was inconsolable. Linda carried her to the car, both of them crying, while cameras flashed and protesters continued their dueling chants. That evening, Emma refused to eat dinner. She lay in her bed, staring at the wall, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. When Linda tried to talk to her, Emma whispered, "I want to take it all back. I want to tell them I was wrong." Linda called Dr. Williams in a panic. "She's shutting down. She wants to recant. I don't know what to do." Dr. Williams arrived at the Rodriguez home within 20 minutes. She'd canceled her evening plans and driven straight over, knowing this was a critical moment. If Emma gave up now, Michael Brennan would walk free. And more than that, Emma would carry the guilt and trauma for the rest of her life, convinced that she'd failed, that her voice didn't matter, that telling the truth wasn't worth it. In Emma's dimly lit bedroom, Dr. Williams sat on the edge of the bed. "Emma, I'm not going to tell you that this is easy or fair. It's not. What's happening to you is terrible, and you shouldn't have to go through it." "Then why do I have to?" Emma's voice was muffled by her pillow. "Because sometimes doing the right thing is really, really hard. But I want you to think about something. What if there's another little girl who Michael might hurt? What if your courage to tell the truth is the only thing that can stop him?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so small Dr. Williams had to lean closer to hear, she said, "Is there? Another girl. Dr. Williams chose her words carefully. I can't tell you about other cases, but I can tell you that when people like Michael do bad things, you're usually not the only one. Your bravery in speaking up might help other kids too. Emma rolled over, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Will it always be this hard? No, baby, I promise it won't always feel like this. Right now, you're in the hardest part, but on the other side of this, there's peace. There's safety. There's knowing you were brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered most. Outside Emma's window, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness. Somewhere in that town, Michael Brennan was preparing his defense, confident in his ability to discredit a child. Somewhere, his supporters were planning their next protest. And somewhere, perhaps, another child lay awake with their own terrible secret, too afraid to speak. Emma closed her eyes. She didn't take back her words, not that night. But the breaking point had been reached, and everyone involved knew that the real battle, the trial itself, would push Emma even further. The question was, would her tiny voice survive? Judge Margaret Sullivan had presided over family court for 19 years, but this case was different. As she reviewed the defense motion to exclude Emma Rodriguez's testimony, her experienced eyes saw what Robert Hastings was really arguing, that a 7-year-old child was too young, too suggestible, too unreliable to be believed. It was a common defense tactic, and sometimes it worked. The competency hearing was scheduled for a gray November morning. Unlike the preliminary hearings chaos, this would take place in Judge Sullivan's private chambers, just the judge, the attorneys, Emma, her mother, Dr. Williams, and a court reporter. No protesters, no cameras, but the stakes were just as high. If Judge Sullivan ruled Emma incompetent to testify, the case would collapse. Michael Brennan would walk free, and Emma would learn that her voice, her truth, her courage meant nothing in the eyes of the law. Emma sat in the waiting room, her legs dangling from a chair too large for her small frame. She wore her favorite purple dress, the one with butterflies on it, because Dr. Williams had told her to wear something that made her feel brave. But Emma didn't feel brave. She felt sick to her stomach. What if I say something wrong? She whispered to her mother. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. There's no wrong answer, baby. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone wants. But Emma knew that wasn't quite right. Some people didn't want her truth. They wanted her to disappear, to be quiet, to let Michael Brennan go back to being everyone's hero. Ada James Morrison emerged from the judge's chambers, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. Emma, the judge wants to talk to you. She's going to ask you some questions to make sure you understand what's happening. There's nothing to be scared of. Judge Sullivan is very kind. Just answer her honestly, okay? Emma nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. Judge Sullivan's chambers were lined with law books and photographs of her own grandchildren. The judge herself was in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. When Emma entered, Judge Sullivan smiled warmly. Hello, Emma, I'm Judge Sullivan. You can call me Judge Margaret if that's easier. Come sit down, would you like some water? Emma shook her head and climbed into the chair across from the judge's desk. Her mother sat beside her, and Dr. Williams stood nearby. On the other side of the room, Robert Hastings sat with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. Emma, I need to ask you some questions today, Judge Sullivan began gently. They might seem silly, but they're important. Can you do that for me? Yes, ma'am. Good. First, do you know why you're here today? Emma's voice was barely audible. Because of Michael, because of what he did to me. And do you know what it means to tell the truth? Emma nodded. It means saying what really happened, not making stuff up. That's exactly right. Now, if I told you the sky was green, would that be the truth? No, ma'am, the sky is blue. What if I really, really wanted the sky to be green? What if everyone else said it was green? Would that make it true? Emma's brown eyes met the judge's steadily. No, The truth doesn't change just because people want it to. Judge Sullivan felt a chill run down her spine. This child understood more than many adults did about the nature of truth and lies. Robert Hastings leaned forward. "Your Honor, with respect, may I ask a few questions?" Judge Sullivan nodded, though her expression was wary. "Keep it appropriate, counselor." Hastings turned to Emma with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emma, do you love your mother?" "Yes." "Would you do anything to make her happy?" Emma frowned, confused by the question. "I guess so." "So if your mother wanted you to say something, you might say it to make her happy, right?" Ada Morrison started to object, but Emma's voice cut through the room, stronger than before. "My mommy didn't tell me to say anything. She didn't even know about Michael until I told Mrs. Patterson. Nobody told me what to say. I said it because it's true." Hastings' smile tightened. "Emma, isn't it possible you misunderstood what happened? That maybe Michael was just trying to help you with something, like giving you a bath or—" "I'm 7, not stupid." Emma's voice rose, her small body trembling with emotion. "I know the difference between a bath and what he did. I know what hurting feels like." "Emma," Linda reached for her daughter, but Emma stood up from her chair, her eyes blazing with an intensity that shocked everyone in the room. "He told me it was our secret. He said if I told anyone, bad things would happen. He said nobody would believe me because I'm just a kid. And you know what? He was right. Half the town thinks I'm lying, but I'm not lying. It happened. It happened 13 times, and I counted because I wanted it to stop, and I kept hoping it would stop, but it didn't." Tears streamed down Emma's face, but she remained standing, her small fists clenched at her sides. The room was silent except for her ragged breathing. Judge Sullivan's own eyes glistened with unshed tears. In nearly 2 decades on the bench, she'd rarely witnessed such raw, devastating honesty. "Emma," the judge said softly, "why did you decide to tell Mrs. Patterson? Why not keep it a secret like Michael said?" Emma's next words would be seared into everyone's memory forever. "Because of Tommy, my baby brother. He's only 2. Emma's voice cracked. "Michael started being nice to Tommy, playing with him, and I saw the way Michael looked at him and I got scared. I thought he might hurt Tommy next, and Tommy's just a baby. He can't tell anyone, so I had to tell. Even if everyone hates me, even if they call me a liar, I had to protect Tommy." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda Rodriguez broke down sobbing, pulling Emma into her arms. Dr. Williams wiped tears from her own cheeks. Even the court reporter who transcribed countless hearings had to pause to compose herself. Robert Hastings sat back in his chair, his usual confidence shaken. He'd expected a scared, easily manipulated child. Instead, he'd encountered someone with a moral clarity that was unshakable. Judge Sullivan removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly as she processed what she'd just witnessed. "I think we have everything we need. Emma, you can go back to the waiting room now. You did very well." As Linda led Emma out, the judge turned to the attorneys. Her voice was firm and brooking no argument. "I'm ruling that Emma Rodriguez is competent to testify. This child understands the difference between truth and lies. She comprehends the seriousness of these proceedings. And most importantly, her testimony shows spontaneous, age-appropriate detail that cannot be the product of coaching or suggestion." Hastings stood. "Your Honor, she's 7 years old. The stress of cross-examination, the courtroom environment. Which is why I'm ordering special accommodations. Emma will testify with a support person present. You, Mr. Hastings, will moderate your tone and approach. Any intimidation tactics will result in sanctions. This court will not allow a child victim to be traumatized on the witness stand." Morrison felt a surge of relief, but he knew this was only one battle won. The war was far from over. Outside the courthouse, the news spread quickly. Emma had been deemed competent to testify. The trial would proceed. Michael Brennan's supporters intensified their attacks, flooding social media with posts about judicial overreach and weaponizing children against innocent men. That night, someone threw a brick through the Rodriguez family's living room window. Attached was a note, "Last warning, drop it or suffer the consequences." Linda called the police, then Detective Chen, then sat on her couch surrounded by broken glass, wondering how much more her daughter could endure. In her bedroom, Emma heard the crash and the sirens that followed. She clutched her stuffed rabbit and stared at the ceiling, processing the day's events. She told Judge Sullivan the truth about Tommy, the real reason she'd found her voice after months of silence. What Emma didn't know was that her mention of Tommy had sent Detective Chen's investigation in a new direction. If Brennan had been grooming Emma's baby brother as his next victim, it suggested a pattern, a methodology, a predatory nature that went beyond a single victim. Chen made a note to interview Linda about Tommy's interactions with Brennan, to review any medical records, to look for the early warning signs that Emma had recognized with a sister's protective instinct. The competency hearing had proven Emma could testify, but the real test, the trial itself, loomed ahead like a mountain Emma would have to climb. And at the top of that mountain waited Michael Brennan, confident in his attorney's ability to destroy a 7-year-old girl's credibility. The question wasn't whether Emma understood truth and lies. The question was whether 12 jurors would believe her truth over the lies of a man their town had loved. The answer would determine not just justice for Emma, but the future of every child whose voice had been silenced by fear, shame, and the terrible power of adults who should have protected them. The satellite trucks arrived in Millbrook on a cold December morning, transforming the sleepy Pennsylvania town into a media battleground. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Court TV, every major network wanted a piece of the story that had captivated the nation. Could the testimony of a 7-year-old child send a beloved community hero to prison? Breaking news from Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where the trial of Michael Brennan begins today, Anderson Cooper announced on CNN. The case that's divided a small town and sparked a national debate about child testimony, credible witnesses, and the nature of justice itself. On Fox News, legal analysts debated the ethics of putting such a young child on the witness stand. This is prosecutorial overreach, one commentator argued. A 7-year-old doesn't have the cognitive development to withstand cross-examination. This is a show trial designed to destroy a man's reputation. MSNBC took a different angle. This case highlights how communities often rally around accused abusers when they're prominent citizens, while victims, especially child victims, face devastating backlash for coming forward. The media circus wasn't confined to television. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Twitter exploded with Justice for Emma and Free Mike Brennan trending simultaneously. Online forums debated the case with an intensity usually reserved for celebrity scandals. Think pieces appeared in major newspapers analyzing everything from the reliability of child witnesses to the sociology of small-town hero worship. In the eye of this hurricane sat Emma Rodriguez, who'd gone from anonymous second grader to the most talked-about child in America. Jury selection became a nightmare that stretched across 2 grueling weeks. Ada James Morrison and defense attorney Robert Hastings questioned hundreds of potential jurors, searching for 12 people who hadn't already formed an opinion about the case, an increasingly impossible task in the age of social media. "Have you heard about this case?" Morrison asked potential juror after potential juror. "Of course," most replied. "It's all over Facebook." "Have you formed an opinion about the defendant's guilt or innocence?" The honest ones admitted they had. The rest were dismissed when their social media posts revealed Team Brennan or Believe Survivors hashtags. Finally, after eliminating 347 candidates, they assembled a jury, 7 women, 5 men, ranging from a 23-year-old teacher to a 68-year-old retired factory worker. Each had sworn they could remain impartial, though Morrison worried that the intense community pressure would seep into the jury room regardless of their promises. The Rodriguez home had become a fortress. Police cruisers sat outside 24 hours a day after the brick-throwing incident. Linda had installed security cameras. Emma wasn't allowed to play outside. Her younger brother Tommy, only 2 years old, seemed to sense the tension, becoming clingy and fretful. Dr. Patricia Williams visited daily, preparing Emma for what lay ahead. They practiced deep breathing exercises. They role-played courtroom scenarios. They talked about fear and courage and why telling the truth mattered even when it was hard. "The courtroom will be full of people," Dr. Williams explained gently. "There will be the judge, the jury. Those are the people who listen and decide, and lawyers who will ask you questions. Your mom will be there. I'll be there. You won't be alone." "Will there be cameras?" Emma asked, her voice small. "No cameras in the courtroom. The judge won't allow it. But everyone will know anyway, right? Everyone will hear what I say." Dr. Williams couldn't lie. "Yes, sweetheart, people are interested in this case, but that's not your burden to carry. You just focus on telling your truth. Let the adults worry about everything else." But Emma was worrying. She'd seen the protesters on TV, heard the arguing, watched her mother's face grow more drawn and exhausted with each passing day. The weight of the world's attention pressed down on her small shoulders. Opening statements were scheduled for a Monday morning in mid-December. The courthouse square looked like a war zone. Protesters on both sides held signs and chanted slogans. "Protect our children" versus "Innocent until proven guilty." News correspondents gave live updates from the courthouse steps. Security was unprecedented for Millbrook, with metal detectors and bag searches at every entrance. Inside Courtroom 4A, Michael Brennan sat at the defense table looking every inch the wronged innocent man. He'd lost weight during his time out on bail, giving him a gaunt, sympathetic appearance. His suit was perfectly tailored. His expression conveyed wounded dignity. Robert Hastings had coached him well. The gallery was packed, standing room only. Brennan's supporters filled half the courtroom, their presence a silent show of solidarity. The other half contained victims' rights advocates, reporters, and a handful of Emma's supporters, including Mrs. Patterson, who'd taken a personal day from teaching to be there. Judge Margaret Sullivan entered, her black robe billowing, her expression stern. "All rise." The trial of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania v. Michael James Brennan officially began. Ada Morrison stood for his opening statement, his voice clear and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a 7-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez who found the courage to speak an unspeakable truth. For months, Emma suffered in silence while the defendant, a man her mother trusted, a man this community celebrated, committed heinous acts of sexual abuse against her. Emma was scared. She was ashamed. She was convinced no one would believe her. But she spoke up anyway, because she feared her baby brother would be Michael Brennan's next victim." Morrison paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "Over the next few days, you'll hear Emma's testimony. You'll hear from medical experts who examined her. You'll hear from the forensic interviewer who documented her disclosure. You'll hear from Detective Chen, who investigated this case thoroughly and professionally. And when you've heard all the evidence, you'll know beyond any reasonable doubt that Michael Brennan is guilty." Robert Hastings rose for the defense with the confidence of a man who'd won cases others thought unwinnable. His silver hair gleamed under the courtroom lights. "Members of the jury, my client Michael Brennan is an innocent man whose life has been destroyed by false accusations. For 6 years, Michael served this community as a volunteer firefighter, risking his life to save others. He coached Little League, mentored at-risk youth, organized charity drives. He's received awards, commendations, and the gratitude of countless families." Hastings gestured toward Brennan, who looked appropriately humble. And then, In an instant, all of that was torn away based on the words of a 7-year-old child. A child who, we will show, has been influenced by adults with their own agendas. A child whose parents went through an ugly divorce, whose mother remarried a successful man, whose life was disrupted by family conflict. Hastings' voice rose with righteous indignation. The prosecution wants you to destroy a good man's life based on unreliable testimony from a confused child, but we will show you that there's no physical evidence of abuse, no witnesses, no corroboration, just the coached words of a 7-year-old who doesn't fully understand the consequences of what she's saying. Emma, watching on a closed-circuit monitor from a private room with her mother and Dr. Williams, began to cry. "He's saying I'm lying. Everyone's going to think I'm lying." Linda held her daughter close. "No, baby, the jury hasn't heard from you yet. When they do, they'll know the truth." But would they? That was the question haunting everyone who believed Emma. In a society that valued concrete evidence, forensics, and adult testimony, could a child's voice, no matter how truthful, carry enough weight to convict? The first week of trial proceeded with technical witnesses. The pediatrician who'd examined Emma testified about findings consistent with sexual abuse, though Hastings immediately hammered the word consistent. It wasn't definitive proof, he argued, just possibility. Character witnesses for Brennan paraded through the courtroom, each singing his praises. The fire chief called him the bravest man I know. Former Little League parents gushed about his patience with children. A minister from Brennan's church spoke of his charitable work. Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Legal experts debated on cable news whether Morrison had enough evidence. Social media warriors battled in comment sections. Late-night comedians made uncomfortable jokes about small-town justice. Through it all, Emma waited. Her testimony was scheduled for the second week of trial, the prosecution's star witness, the entire case resting on her tiny shoulders. The night before she was scheduled to take the stand, Emma sat with Dr. Williams in her bedroom. She'd drawn another picture, herself as a small bird standing on a branch, a massive hawk circling overhead. "That's me tomorrow," she whispered, "and that's Mr. Hastings." "Emma, I know you're frightened, but remember what we practiced. Tell the truth. Look at the jury when you can. If you need a break, you can ask for one. What if I mess up? What if I forget something? You won't forget what happened to you. That's not something you can forget." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I want it to be over. I want to stop being scared." "I know, sweetheart. Tomorrow is going to be hard, probably the hardest day of your life so far. But on the other side of tomorrow, you'll know you did the bravest thing a person can do. You told the truth even when the whole world was watching." The whole world was indeed watching. The trial had become a referendum on whether society truly believed children, truly protected the vulnerable, truly valued truth over reputation. And tomorrow, a 7-year-old girl in a purple dress would walk into that courtroom and speak her truth. The question was, would anyone listen? Tuesday morning arrived with a bitter cold that matched the tension gripping Millbrook. Emma Rodriguez woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety. She'd barely slept, her dreams filled with faceless crowds staring at her, judging her, calling her a liar. Now the nightmare was becoming reality. Linda helped her daughter dress in the purple butterfly dress, Emma's armor against the terror that awaited. As Linda braided Emma's long brown hair, her hands trembled. "You're the bravest person I've ever known," she whispered. "Braver than any adult I've met." "I don't feel brave, Mommy. I feel like I'm going to throw up." "Brave people are scared too, baby. They just do the right thing anyway." The drive to the courthouse was silent except for Emma's ragged breathing. Dr. Williams met them at a side entrance, away from the media scrum and protesters. "Remember, Emma, you can take breaks. You can ask for water. Judge Sullivan is on your side. I'll be right there in the courtroom. You're not alone." But as Emma entered courtroom 4A through the judge's private door, she felt more alone than ever. The room was enormous, packed with 200 people whose eyes all turned toward her simultaneously. The jury box loomed to her left. The witness stand looked impossibly high. And there, at the defense table, sat Michael Brennan. Their eyes met for a brief, terrible second. Brennan's expression was carefully neutral, but Emma saw something flicker in his gaze. Was it warning, threat, or her imagination running wild with fear? "You can do this," Dr. Williams whispered, squeezing Emma's hand before she had to let go. Emma's legs felt like jelly as she approached the witness stand. A bailiff helped her onto the chair, adjusting the microphone down to her level. The court clerk administered the oath. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "I do." Judge Sullivan leaned forward with a gentle smile. "Emma, if you need anything, water, a break, anything at all, you just let me know, okay?" Emma nodded, clutching her stuffed rabbit that Dr. Williams had convinced the judge to allow. In the gallery, Linda Rodriguez gripped Mrs. Patterson's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ada James Morrison approached the witness stand with deliberate slowness, keeping his voice soft and friendly. "Good morning, Emma. I know this is scary, but I just want to talk with you for a little while. Is that okay?" "Okay," Emma whispered. "Can you tell the jury your name and how old you are?" "Emma Rodriguez, I'm 7. "What grade are you in?" "3rd grade." Morrison spent the first 15 minutes on gentle questions, Emma's favorite subject, art, her pet cat Whiskers, her drawings. Gradually, Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly. Her voice grew marginally stronger. The jury watched with sympathetic expressions as this small child tried so hard to be brave. Then Morrison's questions shifted. "Emma, do you know why you're here today?" Emma's grip on her rabbit tightened. "Because of Michael, because of what he did to me." "Who is Michael?" "My stepfather. My mom married him last year." "Emma, I need to ask you some difficult questions now. Can you tell the jury what Michael did to you?" The courtroom fell deathly silent. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she began to speak haltingly at first, then with increasing detail. She described the first time Michael came into her room at night. The way he told her it was their special secret. How he said bad things would happen if she told. The specific acts he committed, described in age-appropriate but unmistakably clear language. Morrison guided her through the timeline. "How many times did this happen, Emma?" 13 times. I counted. I marked them on my calendar with little dots that nobody else would know what they meant." "Why did you count?" "Because I kept hoping it would stop. I thought if I counted, maybe when I got to 10 it would be over, but it didn't stop." Several jurors wiped their eyes. In the gallery, people shifted uncomfortably. The raw honesty of Emma's testimony was devastating. "Emma, why did you finally decide to tell someone?" Emma's voice cracked. "Because of Tommy, my baby brother. Michael started playing with him a lot and I saw the way he looked at Tommy and I got scared. Tommy's only 2. He can't tell anyone if something bad happens, so I had to tell, even though I was scared." Morrison asked a few more clarifying questions, then said, "Thank you, Emma. You're very brave." But Emma's ordeal was far from over. Robert Hastings rose from the defense table like a predator approaching prey. Judge Sullivan immediately intervened. "Mr. Hastings, I'm warning you now, moderate your tone and approach. This is a child witness." Hastings nodded, but his smile was cold. "Of course, Your Honor." He turned to Emma. "Emma, you love your mother very much, don't you?" "Yes." "And you want her to be happy?" "Yes." "Your mother was sad after your father left, wasn't she? The divorce was hard on her." Emma frowned, confused. "I guess so." "And when she married Michael, she seemed happy again." "At first. But then you didn't like sharing your mother's attention, did you? You wanted things to go back to how they were before Michael. Ada Morrison shot to his feet. Objection, argumentative and leading. Sustained, Judge Sullivan ruled. Mr. Hastings, ask actual questions, not speeches. Hastings adjusted his approach but pressed on. Emma, isn't it true that you were angry when your mother remarried? No, I was scared. Scared of what? Of Michael being kind to you, of him coaching your little league team, of him taking you to get ice cream. Objection, Morrison called again. But Emma didn't wait for the judge's ruling. Something inside her, some reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed, suddenly ignited. She sat up straighter in the witness chair, her small voice cutting through the courtroom chaos. I wasn't scared of ice cream. I was scared of what he did when nobody else was home. I was scared of him coming into my room at night. I was scared of. Hastings interrupted, trying to regain control. Emma, isn't it possible you're confused? That maybe Michael was just helping you with a bath or… I'm 7, not stupid. The courtroom erupted. Judge Sullivan gavelled for order, but Emma kept speaking, her voice rising above the din, all her fear transforming into righteous anger. I know what happened to me. I was there. He hurt me in the bathroom in my bedroom 13 times, and I counted every single one. I know the difference between a bath and what he did. I know what wrong touching is. They taught us in school. Hastings took a step back, genuinely rattled. Emma, I'm just suggesting. Emma turned to face the jury directly, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady and clear. I'm not lying. I know everyone wants me to be lying because then they can keep thinking Michael is nice. But he's not nice. He's a monster who pretends to be nice. And I'm not making it up, and my mom didn't tell me to say it, and I'm not confused. She paused, her small chest heaving with emotion. I know what happened, and telling the truth is really, really hard, and everyone hates me now, and I lost my friends and people threw things at our house. But I had to tell because of Tommy. And because it's wrong. What he did was wrong, and lying about it would be wrong too. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several jurors were openly crying. Even the court reporter had paused, overwhelmed by the raw honesty pouring from this 7-year-old child. Judge Sullivan's voice was thick with emotion. We'll take a 15-minute recess. As the bailiff helped Emma down from the witness stand, her legs finally gave out. Dr. Williams caught her, carrying her to the private room where Linda was waiting. Emma collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing with the release of tension that had been building for months. It's over, baby, Linda whispered. You did it. You were so brave. But Emma's words were muffled against her mother's shoulder. Did they believe me? Do you think they believed me? In the courtroom, the jury filed out in silence. But their faces told a story, shock, sympathy, and for many, a dawning certainty. Robert Hastings sat at the defense table, his legendary confidence shaken. He'd cross-examined hundreds of witnesses, destroyed countless testimonies with his aggressive tactics. But he'd never encountered anyone like Emma Rodriguez, a 7-year-old who'd spoken truth with such devastating clarity that no legal maneuvering could obscure it. Michael Brennan's face had gone pale. For the first time since his arrest, fear flickered in his eyes. His carefully constructed image of the wronged, innocent man was crumbling, destroyed by the unwavering honesty of the child he'd abused. Ada Morrison sat back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of cautious hope. The case wasn't won yet. Hastings would continue fighting, and juries were unpredictable. But Emma's testimony had been extraordinary. Against all odds, her tiny voice had filled that massive courtroom with a truth that couldn't be denied. The moment that would define this trial, that would echo through the legal system for years to come, had just occurred. A 7-year-old girl had stood up to her abuser, and the entire system protecting him, and she had spoken with a power that transcended her size. The courtroom would indeed never forget. The 7 hours following Emma's testimony felt like 7 years. After the emotional recess, Robert Hastings attempted to continue his cross-examination, but the fire had gone out of his attack. Judge Sullivan watched him like a hawk, intervening at the slightest hint of aggression. Emma answered his remaining questions with quiet dignity, never wavering from her truth. When she was finally excused, Emma walked past the defense table without looking at Michael Brennan. She'd said everything she needed to say. Now it was up to the 12 strangers in the jury box to decide if they believed her. The prosecution rested its case that afternoon. Dr. Williams testified about Emma's psychological state, the consistency of her disclosures, and the behavioral indicators of abuse. Detective Sarah Chen walked the jury through her investigation, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the anger she felt toward Brennan. The forensic interviewer played portions of Emma's initial disclosure. The jury watched a small, frightened girl on a video screen, speaking the same truth she'd told in court. The defense called its witnesses, a parade of character references who testified to Brennan's good nature, his community service, his way with children. A psychologist suggested Emma might have false memories implanted by suggestive questioning. But after Emma's devastating testimony, these defenses rang hollow. Closing arguments began on Thursday afternoon. Ada James Morrison stood before the jury, his voice filled with controlled passion. Members of the jury, you've heard from a 7-year-old child who showed more courage in that witness stand than most adults will demonstrate in their entire lives. Emma Rodriguez had every reason to stay silent. Her community turned against her. She lost friends. Her family was threatened. But she spoke anyway because she knew the truth, and she knew that protecting her baby brother was worth any cost. Morrison gestured toward the empty witness stand. The defense wants you to believe that Emma is confused or lying or coached, but you heard her. You saw her. That child described specific incidents with details that only a victim could know. She counted the times she was abused, 13 times, because she was hoping it would stop. What 7-year-old makes up a detail like that? He paused, making eye contact with each juror. The medical evidence supports her testimony. The behavioral changes her teacher observed support her testimony. The forensic interview supports her testimony. And most importantly, your own common sense should tell you that Emma Rodriguez is telling the truth. Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the jury to lean forward. Emma asked me before she testified, will they believe me? She was terrified that you wouldn't. She was terrified that Michael Brennan's reputation, his status in this community, would matter more than her truth. Don't let that fear become reality. Believe Emma. Convict Michael Brennan. Give that brave little girl the justice she deserves. Robert Hastings delivered his closing with the desperation of a man who knew he was losing. He hammered on reasonable doubt, the lack of physical evidence, the dangers of convicting based solely on a child's testimony. But his words lacked conviction. Emma's testimony had broken through every defensive strategy he'd prepared. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, Emma is a sympathetic witness, Hastings argued. But sympathy is not evidence. We all feel for this child, but we cannot convict an innocent man because we feel sorry for her. The prosecution has not met their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. My client deserves to go home to his life, his reputation restored. The jury received their instructions from Judge Sullivan at 4:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. They filed into the deliberation room, 7 women and 5 men who now held Michael Brennan's fate and Emma's future in their hands. Emma watched from home on the closed-circuit feed the court had provided. She sat curled up on the couch between her mother and Dr. Williams, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. The waiting was agony. The jury deliberated through dinner, then through the evening. Emma fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past weeks. Linda covered her daughter with a blanket and kept vigil, watching the empty courtroom on the screen, waiting for any sign of movement. At 11:34 p.m. the courthouse phone rang. The jury had reached a verdict. The call came too late to reconvene that night. Judge Sullivan scheduled the verdict reading for 9 a.m. Friday morning. Emma slept fitfully, her dreams a confused jumble of courtrooms and butterflies and voices asking, "Do you believe her?" Friday morning dawned gray and cold. The courthouse filled early. Protesters, supporters, media, and the simply curious all wanted to witness the conclusion of the trial that had captivated the nation. Emma and Linda arrived through the side entrance, avoiding the cameras and the shouting crowds. Emma wore her purple butterfly dress again. "For luck," she told her mother, but her hands shook as they walked through the courthouse halls. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Sullivan took the bench. "Bring in the jury." The 12 jurors filed in, their faces solemn and unreadable. Emma's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. In the gallery, Mrs. Patterson clutched a rosary. Detective Chen sat stone-faced, her career and reputation also riding on this verdict. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Sullivan asked. The foreman, a 52-year-old accountant named David Martinez, stood. "We have, Your Honor." In the case of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Michael James Brennan, on the charge of sexual abuse of a minor in the first degree, how do you find? Time seemed to stop. Emma held her breath. Linda's fingernails dug into Dr. Williams' hand. "We find the defendant guilty." The courtroom exploded. Michael Brennan's supporters gasped and cried out in disbelief. Emma's advocates erupted in applause before Judge Sullivan's gavel crashed down, demanding order. At the defense table, Brennan's face went white as chalk. His hands, which had maintained such careful control throughout the trial, began to shake. "On the charge of endangering the welfare of a child, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of corruption of a minor, how do you find?" "Guilty." "Guilty on all counts, every single charge." In the private viewing room, Emma burst into tears, not tears of sadness but of overwhelming relief. Linda pulled her daughter close, both of them sobbing. "You did it, baby. They believed you. They believed you." "It's really over." Emma's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. "It's really over," Dr. Williams confirmed, her own cheeks wet with tears. "You were so brave, Emma, so incredibly brave." In the courtroom, Judge Sullivan polled the jury individually. Each member confirmed their guilty verdict. Hastings immediately requested the jury be polled again, as if repetition might somehow change their minds. But the verdict stood. 12 people had heard Emma's testimony and unanimously decided she was telling the truth. Brennan was remanded into custody immediately, his bail revoked. As bailiffs handcuffed him, he finally lost his composure. "This is wrong," he shouted. "That child is lying. This whole trial was a joke." Judge Sullivan's gavel cracked down. "Mr. Brennan, you will remain silent or be removed from my courtroom." But Brennan continued shouting as he was led away. "You're destroying an innocent man. That little brat destroyed my life, she." The door closed behind him, cutting off his rant. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Brennan's mask had finally slipped, revealing the ugly rage beneath. Several jurors nodded to each other, as if this outburst confirmed what they'd already decided. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Pennsylvania sentencing guidelines called for 15 to 30 years for the crimes Brennan had committed. Ada Morrison intended to push for the maximum. The media frenzy outside was deafening. "Justice for Emma," chants drowned out the scattered "Free Brennan" protests that had lost their conviction. News anchors delivered breathless updates, "Guilty on all counts." 7-year-old's testimony convinced jury. Brennan faces decades in prison. Inside the courthouse, Emma finally emerged from the private room, holding her mother's hand. Detective Chen approached and knelt down to Emma's level. "You did good, kid, really good. You helped put a dangerous man away." Emma's response was simple but profound. "I just told the truth." Sometimes that's the hardest and bravest thing we can do. 2 weeks later, Courtroom 4A filled once more for sentencing. Michael Brennan, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit and looking haggard from his time in jail, stood before Judge Sullivan. The judge's voice carried the weight of her 19 years on the bench. "Mr. Brennan, you betrayed the trust of a child, a community, and every person who believed in you. You used your position of authority to prey upon a vulnerable 7-year-old girl. Emma Rodriguez showed extraordinary courage in coming forward, and this court has found you guilty beyond any doubt." Judge Sullivan paused, her eyes hard. "The impact of your crimes extends far beyond one child. You've damaged a community's ability to trust. You've traumatized a family. You've demonstrated no remorse. Indeed, your outburst at the verdict showed only concern for yourself." She leaned forward. "This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison with no possibility of parole. You will register as a sex offender for life. You are never to have contact with the victim or her family. May you use this time to reflect on the harm you've caused." 25 years. Brennan would be 68 when he got out, his prime years spent in prison, his reputation destroyed, his life as he knew it over. As bailiffs led him away, Brennan turned one last time toward the gallery where Emma sat with her mother. But Emma wasn't cowering anymore. She met his gaze steadily, this tiny girl who'd brought down a monster. Brennan looked away first. Outside, Linda Rodriguez stood on the courthouse steps and read a brief statement to the press. "My daughter is a hero. She saved other children from this predator, and she showed us all what courage looks like. We're grateful to the jury, to Judge Sullivan, and to everyone who believed Emma when it mattered most." That night, Emma drew a picture, not of darkness and monsters, but of a small bird breaking free from a cage, flying toward a bright sun. The nightmare was finally over. The truth had won. 6 months after Michael Brennan's sentencing, spring arrived in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, bringing with it a sense of renewal that the town desperately needed. The satellite trucks had departed. The protesters had gone home. The media had moved on to the next sensational story. But the impact of Emma Rodriguez's courage continued to ripple outward in ways no one had anticipated. Emma sat in Mrs. Patterson's 4th-grade classroom, her hand raised high to answer a question about fractions. The shy, withdrawn girl who'd once hunched in the back corner was gone. In her place was a confident 9-year-old who participated in class discussions, laughed with friends at recess, and no longer wore long sleeves to hide invisible wounds. "Emma, what's your answer?" Mrs. Patterson asked with a warm smile. "3/4, Emma called out clearly. Her voice, once barely a whisper, now rang through the classroom without hesitation. After school, Emma joined the art club, where she'd become known for her vibrant drawings of butterflies, birds, and rainbows. The dark, terrifying images she'd once created had been replaced by explosions of color and hope. Mrs. Patterson kept one of Emma's drawings framed on her desk, a phoenix rising from ashes, titled "Starting Over." "You're quite the artist," a new student named Lily commented, admiring Emma's work. Emma beamed. "Thanks, I like drawing things that make people happy." The transformation wasn't just visible in Emma. Linda Rodriguez had evolved from a woman torn between disbelief and horror into a fierce advocate for abuse survivors. She joined forces with victims' rights organizations and spent her evenings speaking at community centers, schools, and churches. "My daughter taught me what real courage looks like," Linda told an audience of parents at Millbrook High School one evening. She was 7 years old, and she stood up to her abuser when half this town called her a liar. "If a child can be that brave, what excuse do we adults have for staying silent when we witness injustice?" Her words resonated. Slowly, painfully, Millbrook began to heal from the division that had nearly destroyed it. Former Brennan supporters faced the uncomfortable truth that they'd defended a predator while attacking his victim. Some issued public apologies. Others quietly retreated from public life, ashamed of their role in Emma's persecution. The Rodriguez family home, once vandalized and threatened, now received different kinds of letters. Thank you for your courage. Emma inspired my daughter to speak up about her coach. Your family saved lives. Detective Sarah Chen had received a promotion and a commendation for her sensitive handling of Emma's case. But the recognition that mattered most to her came from Emma herself, who'd drawn her a picture of a superhero with Chen's face, titled Detective Chen, Protector of Kids. Chen kept it in her office alongside the case file that had defined her career. She'd since handled 7 more child abuse cases, and in each one, she thought of Emma's bravery and determination to get justice right. Ada James Morrison's career had taken an unexpected turn. After the Brennan trial, he'd been invited to speak at law schools across the country about prosecuting child abuse cases. He developed training programs for prosecutors on working with young witnesses and protecting them from traumatic courtroom experiences. Emma Rodriguez changed how I approach every case, Morrison told a room full of law students at Penn State. She reminded me that behind every case file is a real person, often a child, whose entire future depends on whether we have the courage to fight for them. He still kept Emma's drawing of a bird breaking free from a cage framed in his office. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by a difficult case, he looked at that picture and remembered why he became a prosecutor. But Emma's impact extended far beyond Millbrook. 3 months after Brennan's conviction, Pennsylvania State Representative Michelle Torres contacted Linda Rodriguez with a proposal: legislation to improve protections for child witnesses in abuse cases. Representative Torres had been following the trial closely. Emma's experience exposed serious gaps in our system, she explained during a meeting with Linda, Detective Chen, and Morrison. Children shouldn't have to face the kind of intimidation and community backlash Emma endured. We can do better. The legislation took shape over several months of committee hearings, expert testimony, and emotional debates. It mandated specialized trauma-informed training for all attorneys handling child abuse cases. It required courts to provide child advocates and support services for young witnesses. It established stricter penalties for witness intimidation when the victim was a minor. It created a fund for mental health services for child abuse survivors. The bill was formally titled the Child Witness Protection and Support Act, but everyone knew it by its real name, Emma's Law. On a bright October morning, 1 year after Emma had first whispered her truth to Mrs. Patterson, 10-year-old Emma Rodriguez stood in the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, wearing her purple butterfly dress. Governor Patricia Walsh prepared to sign Emma's law into effect, and she'd invited Emma to attend. "Emma, would you like to say a few words?" the governor asked gently. Emma stepped up to the microphone, her mother beside her for support. The room was filled with legislators, advocates, reporters, and survivors. A year ago, this much attention would have terrified her. Now, Emma understood the power of her voice. "When I told the truth about what happened to me, I was really scared," Emma said, her voice clear and steady. "I thought nobody would believe me because I'm just a kid, and a lot of people didn't believe me at first. That was really hard." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I kept telling the truth anyway because it was the right thing to do, and because of Tommy, my little brother. I wanted to protect him." Emma looked directly at the cameras. "If this law helps other kids feel safe to tell the truth, then everything I went through was worth it. Kids should be protected. Kids should be believed. And kids' voices matter just as much as grown-ups' voices." The room erupted in applause. Governor Walsh signed the bill with Emma standing beside her, and photographers captured the moment. A small girl whose courage had literally changed the law. Emma's law inspired similar legislation in 12 other states over the following 2 years. The ripple effects continued expanding. But perhaps the most profound impact of Emma's courage came from the other victims who found their own voices because of her example. In the year following Brennan's conviction, 12 children in Pennsylvania came forward about abuse by different perpetrators: coaches, teachers, family members, trusted community figures. Each of those children cited Emma's bravery as the reason they finally spoke up. "If Emma could do it, I can too," an 11-year-old girl told Detective Chen during her own forensic interview. All 12 cases resulted in convictions. 12 predators were removed from positions where they could harm children. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of future victims were protected because Emma had shown them that speaking truth to power was possible. 3 years after the trial, Emma Rodriguez was a thriving 12-year-old middle schooler. She joined the school debate team, where her clear, confident voice argued passionately about social issues. She volunteered at the local community center, mentoring younger children. She'd even started a blog called Speaking Up, where she wrote about courage, justice, and healing. Her baby brother Tommy, now 5 years old, had no memory of the dark period when Michael Brennan had lived in their home. He knew only that his big sister was famous for being brave, and that she'd protected him from something bad. He adored her completely. Linda had returned to work at the bank, where her colleagues now treated her with respect rather than suspicion. She'd also started dadding again, carefully, cautiously, with Emma's input and approval every step of the way. Dr. Patricia Williams maintained contact with the Rodriguez family, checking in quarterly even though Emma no longer needed regular therapy. The psychologist had written a book about childhood resilience, with Emma's story, name changed, as the central case study. The book was now required reading in graduate psychology programs across the country. Mrs. Patterson still taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. Every year when October came around, she told her new students about the importance of telling trusted adults when something is wrong. "You are never too small for your voice to matter," she always said. And in her desk drawer, she kept Emma's original drawing, the dark picture of a crying stick figure that had started everything. Michael Brennan remained in state prison, where he would stay for 20 more years. His appeals had been denied. His name was synonymous with predatory behavior. The Millbrook Fire Department had removed his plaque from their wall of honor and donated his Citizen of the Year award to a domestic violence shelter, where it was melted down and reformed into a sculpture called Breaking the Silence. On the 5th anniversary of the trial, a documentary film crew came to Millbrook to tell Emma's story. Now 14 years old, Emma had grown into a poised young woman who spoke eloquently about trauma, recovery, and the justice system. "People ask me if I regret coming forward," Emma told the camera. "They ask if it was worth all the pain and backlash, and the answer is yes, absolutely yes. Because I told the truth, because I helped protect other kids, because I learned that my voice, even when it was tiny and scared, had the power to change things." The documentary, titled Tiny Voice, Huge Impact, The Emma Rodriguez Story, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was later acquired by Netflix. It sparked renewed conversations about child abuse, victim advocacy, and the importance of believing survivors. Emma's story was used in law school curricula as the gold standard for prosecuting child abuse cases. Her testimony was cited in judicial opinions about child witness protections. Her name became shorthand in victims' advocacy circles for courage in the face of impossible odds. But for Emma herself, the greatest victory was simpler. She could sleep through the night without nightmares. She could trust again. She could laugh freely. She could look at herself in the mirror and feel proud of who she was. One evening, as a high school senior preparing for college, Emma sat at her desk writing her admissions essay. The prompt asked, "Describe a moment when you showed courage." Emma smiled and began to type. "When I was 7 years old, I whispered 4 words to my teacher that would change my life forever. 'He hurts me, teacher.' At that moment, I had no idea that my tiny, scared voice would eventually echo through courtrooms, inspire legislation, and give courage to countless other children. I just knew I had to tell the truth." As she wrote, Emma glanced at the framed photograph on her desk, herself at age 7 in a purple butterfly dress, standing beside Governor Walsh as Emma's law was signed. That little girl looked so small, so fragile, but Emma knew the truth. She had been incredibly strong, strong enough to stand up to a monster, strong enough to face down a hostile community, strong enough to speak truth when the whole world was watching. Her voice had been tiny, but its impact had been immeasurable. And somewhere in Pennsylvania and beyond, other children with their own terrible secrets read Emma's story and found the courage to whisper their own truths. Because Emma had shown them that even the smallest voice, when speaking truth, could change the world. The courtroom would never forget the moment when 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez stood up to her abuser and said, "I know what happened. I was there." But more importantly, Emma would never forget that she'd found her voice, and in finding it, she'd helped countless others find theirs too. The end.